he started getting a lot of ear infections and sinus infections and sore throats. So when he was 2.5, we had his tonsils out, and the x-rays picked up an abnormality in the bone. So they took x-rays of his entire body, and they found that there was something wrong. They weren't sure what.
For years, the world believed it knew the story of Rocky Dennis, the boy born with a rare bone disorder who defied doctors, inspired millions, and became immortalized in a Hollywood film. But what if the truth was not what you've been told? But before she died, Rocky Dennis's mom finally broke the silence about the Wonder Boy, and her truth is not good. Her confession reshaped everything about Rocky's life, his death, and his legacy. This is the story behind the mask, and it will leave you stunned. The silence before the truth. For decades, the story of Rocky Dennis lived in the world's memory as one of light, perseverance, and inspiration. He was the boy whose rare condition could have defined him, but instead, he was celebrated as someone who transcended it. His name was immortalized in the 1985 film Mask, and his legacy was framed as a miracle of courage, the child who smiled against impossible odds. The public clung to that version of the tale. It was a clean, uplifting story that television programs, magazine profiles, and Hollywood itself loved to tell. His mother, Florence "Rusty" Dennis, did not often correct the narrative. She allowed it to grow, to comfort, to inspire. To many, she was the fiery woman who stood by her son, helping him live twice as long as doctors expected. But behind that silence lay decades of reality left unspoken. There were shadows hidden under the triumphs, nights of tears that never made it to screen, and truths too uncomfortable to be shared when the world only wanted hope. As her own life neared its end, Rusty finally let the silence break. She spoke words that unsettled the public memory, words that stripped away the comforting myth. Her revelations tore apart the clean edges of Rocky's legend. They exposed pain, chaos, and the weight of a reality the world had not seen. Rocky was not the flawless inspiration people believed him to be. The neatness of the story, carefully woven for film and media, was never the truth. The reality, as Rusty made clear, was not good. The medical sentence. On December 4, 1961, Roy L. Rocky Dennis came into the world in California. His arrival was ordinary in every sense. He weighed a healthy 7 pounds, showing no visible signs of illness, no warnings of the nightmare to come. In those early years, his mother raised him like any other child. Her days filled with the laughter of a smiling boy who loved simple joys and knew nothing of the shadow already written into his bones. The illusion of normalcy shattered when Rocky was just over 2 years old. Recurring ear and sinus infections sent him for x-rays, and what doctors at UCLA found marked the beginning of a harrowing journey. His skull revealed irregularities that defied explanation. Tests confirmed a diagnosis almost unheard of: craniodiaphyseal dysplasia, a disorder so rare it was known among physicians by another name, Lionitis. It caused calcium to accumulate in the bones, turning the skull into an unrelenting prison that grew thicker, heavier, more grotesquely deformed with each passing year. The prognosis was cruel. Doctors spoke of the future not with possibility but with inevitability. They told Rusty her son's vision would dim until he was blind. His hearing would fade until silence replaced sound. His skull, as it thickened, would not only distort his face, but also crush his brain. They warned her that the handful of cases in medical history had ended quickly. No one with this condition had lived beyond childhood. For Rusty, these words were like a death sentence delivered to a child who had barely begun to live. They told her to expect decline, to prepare for a funeral before he reached his 7th birthday. They did not speak of milestones, dreams, or teenage years. Instead, they measured his life in losses, senses taken away one by one until nothing remained. Rocky was not expected to live beyond 7. The doctors had placed a number on his existence, and in that number, they buried hope. But hope is hard to crush, and Rocky and Rusty were about to show the world just how fiercely one can cling to life. A childhood under siege. From the moment doctors stamped his life with a grim prognosis, Rocky's existence was framed by resistance. They told Rusty that her son's path was narrow, filled with shadows of limitation, yet she refused to let him grow inside those walls. When Rocky turned 6, she defied their counsel and marched him into public school. Physicians cautioned against it, insisting he would struggle, urging special education instead. Teachers, too, objected, claiming his appearance would frighten other children, that he would be a disruption in their neat world. But Rusty's resolve was stronger than their fear. She believed her boy deserved more than a sheltered life. Once inside the classroom, Rocky proved them all wrong. His test scores revealed sharp reasoning, his curiosity matched his peers, and his determination outpaced them. He was not the image of disability they expected. He was a child with a mind eager to learn. Rocky was not the passive figure medicine tried to script. He was a participant, eager to challenge and succeed. Music was one of Rocky's deepest escapes. Above all, he adored Bruce Springsteen. His bedroom walls were covered with Springsteen posters, and he listened endlessly to the lyrics that spoke of struggle, resilience, and defiance. Springsteen's music gave him strength, a soundtrack that matched the life he was forced to live. Rocky was not just a medical case or an inspirational figure. He was a teenager with passions, tastes, and idols like any other. This detail mattered so much that Rusty fought for it to be preserved in his story. The original screenplay for Mask was written with Springsteen's songs woven into the narrative, tracks like Born to Run and The Promised Land, capturing Rocky's spirit. Outside of school, summer camp became his sanctuary. Among children with disabilities, Rocky's warmth shone. His peers recognized something in him that the outside world often missed. They voted him as friendliest camper, most good-natured, and best buddy. For those weeks, he was not defined by doctors' whispers or strangers' stares. He was celebrated for his spirit. Yet even as laughter filled his days, the shadows never fully retreated. His life was punctuated with ceaseless medical visits, eye exams that seemed endless, checkups that carried the silent weight of dread. Specialists warned of the darkness that might soon consume his sight, the threat of blindness hovering over him like an unspoken sentence. The world hailed him as resilient, but that resilience was forged in fire. Rocky was not free of pain or struggle. Behind every accolade was a battle. Each achievement wrestled from a body determined to betray him. The applause never erased the suffering, but it revealed his defiance, an unrelenting refusal to let the world dictate what he could or could not do. The humor that shielded him. Adolescence deepened the challenges. His condition advanced relentlessly, reshaping his skull, altering his features in ways that drew stares and whispers. The headaches became heavier, waves of pain that sometimes blurred his days into haze. His eyesight weakened, making the very world he fought so hard to stay part of begin slipping away. Rocky's reflection became a battlefield, every glance in the mirror a reminder of the changes he could not control. But he refused to crumble. Instead, he discovered his weapon, humor. He turned ridicule on its head, wielding laughter as a shield. On Halloween, he transformed what others saw as deformity into spectacle. Neighbors watched in disbelief as he pulled off one mask, only to reveal what they thought was another, not realizing it was his true face. The moment of stunned silence would break into laughter, and in that laughter, Rocky found power. He could control the room, flip the script, own the joke instead of being owned by it. Jokes became his armor. He leaned into wit whenever stares lingered too long. Laughter softened the cruelty of strangers and gave him a sense of authority over how he was perceived. When a surgeon suggested cosmetic operations to bring him closer to normal, Rocky rejected the notion outright. He was not interested in chasing illusions of conformity. His face, in all its uniqueness, belonged to him. Changing it to satisfy others felt like surrender. Rocky was not ashamed. He carried his features with a pride few could comprehend, a pride rooted in acceptance of self rather than escape from reality. Even as his body betrayed him with pain, even as the world reminded him daily that he was different, he built his shield of humor, courage, and unshakable self-identity. In the laughter he inspired, he reclaimed the dignity so often denied to him. A household of chaos and love. Rusty raised Rocky with a determination that bordered on defiance, yet her life was far from steady. Their home was not a quiet sanctuary, but a revolving door of energy, unpredictability, and often recklessness. Rusty's friends were bikers, outsiders, and rebels who lived on the fringes of conventional society. The house was filled with the smell of cigarettes and marijuana, the roar of engines outside, the pulse of rock music shaking the walls. There were parties that blurred into mornings, drug use that became background noise, and frequent brushes with the law. Rusty herself was no stranger to arrest records, courtrooms, or the stigma of being labeled unfit. Hollywood later softened these realities, painting Rusty as eccentric but unwavering in her devotion to her son. The truth was layered and more unsettling. Yes, Rusty loved Rocky ferociously. She fought the schools that wanted to exclude him, challenged the doctors who gave up on him, and insisted he deserved to live not in the shadows, but in the world. Her love was never in question, but her ability to provide a stable foundation was. She battled her own demons, addiction, impulsiveness, poor choices, and Rocky, for all his resilience, grew up in a world where love and chaos intertwined daily. His childhood was shaped by contradiction. Laughter in the living room followed by shouting in the kitchen. Tenderness from his mother counterbalanced by the disorder of her lifestyle. His strength was forged in this tension, born from the reality that affection and volatility can exist side by side. In many ways, Rocky's extraordinary endurance was a reflection of this household of contradictions, where care was always present but never separated from instability. The rapid decline. By 1978, the strength that had defined Rocky's youth began to crumble under the relentless weight of his condition. The headaches that had once come in waves grew sharper and more constant, pounding against his skull with merciless regularity. His energy, once a bright spark that allowed him to keep up with friends and win over strangers with his humor, dulled into exhaustion. Meals became a struggle as his appetite faded, and even small joys seemed to slip from his grasp. His friends noticed the change first. Rocky, who had once loved to make others laugh, began to withdraw, spending more time alone in his room, curtains drawn, the world outside muffled. He spoke less, smiled less, and his once vibrant personality seemed cloaked in fatigue. Rusty, whose life had been a constant fight against the medical world's predictions, sensed what was coming, even as she tried to deny it. On October 4th, 1978, Rocky Dennis died in his bed at just 16 years old. Yet his death was not the cinematic farewell Hollywood later offered to audiences. There was no glowing light, no quiet scene of peaceful acceptance. Rocky was not surrounded by warmth and soft words, his life fading in a haze of serenity. His passing was harsh, marked by the cruel reality of pain and decline. It was a raw, unromantic ending, stripped of the comforting illusions that film would later drape over his story. Rusty lost her son in a way that no movie could ever capture, and the world, which would later embrace his myth, never truly understood the suffering that preceded it. The Hollywood Mask. 7 years after Rocky's death, Hollywood seized his story. In 1985, director Peter Bogdanovich released Mask, a film that would forever shape how the world remembered him. Eric Stoltz, after enduring hours each day under heavy prosthetics, portrayed Rocky. Cher, with her commanding presence, stepped into the role of Rusty, the fiercely protective mother. The movie was a sensation. It won awards, gathered applause from critics, and cemented Rocky as a cultural figure who symbolized courage and love against the odds. But the film was not an honest reflection of reality. It was a rewrite, a selective retelling designed for mass consumption. Rocky's half-brother Joshua, who had been a meaningful part of his life and family dynamic, was completely erased, as though his existence would distract from the simplified narrative. The funeral scene, perhaps the most intimate moment of Rocky's story, was fictionalized. Instead of the raw grief and unadorned farewell that had marked the real event, the movie staged a symbolic display: flowers, baseball cards, and carefully framed tokens that were meant to uplift rather than wound. Cher's Rusty was softened too, her edges blunted. The real woman who had battled addiction, arrests, and a turbulent lifestyle was replaced by a version who was flawed but ultimately safe, sympathetic, and sanitized for Hollywood audiences. Rocky was not portrayed truthfully. His contradictions were smoothed away, his pain reshaped into an almost saintly lesson. The reality of a boy who lived with both chaos and love, who endured instability alongside devotion, was trimmed down until only a marketable inspiration remained. The Hollywood mask became his new identity, worn so tightly that the world rarely questioned whether it reflected the truth beneath. The growing myth. After Mask came out, Rocky Dennis was no longer just a boy who had lived and died. He was transformed into a legend. Schools across America told his story to inspire students. Teachers leaned on his narrative as proof that obstacles could be overcome with determination and humor. Parents of children with disabilities held up his life as a shining example of resilience and hope. The media embraced him as the boy who had defied medical predictions, the child who faced ridicule with a smile, the young man who had died but left behind a legacy of courage. Rocky had become a cultural shorthand for strength in the face of adversity. Rusty remained silent through it all. She rarely challenged the film's portrayal, rarely corrected the myths that flourished in the wake of the movie. She allowed the world to believe in the polished version, the one that uplifted rather than unsettled. The silence was strategic, but it also came at a cost. With each retelling, the real Rocky was buried deeper under layers of myth. His flaws, his ordinary human frustrations, his environment of chaos and disorder, all of it faded until only the inspirational symbol remained. The silence created a comforting illusion for the world, but it was not the full picture. Rocky was not remembered as a complete human being, filled with contradictions, pain, laughter, and complexity. Instead, he was remembered as a myth, a carefully edited lesson meant to inspire strangers rather than reveal the difficult, unvarnished truth. The boy who had lived a raw and complicated life became, in death, an icon who bore little resemblance to the reality his family had known, the mother near the end. As Rusty aged, the quiet she had once guarded began to suffocate her. The legend of Rocky, repeated in classrooms, news features, and the enduring shadow of Hollywood's mask, was a tale that uplifted strangers but hollowed her out. For years, she had accepted the myth because it gave her son's life a kind of immortality. People admired him, children were inspired by him, and she became a symbol of maternal devotion. But beneath that veneer, she carried the truth like a burden pressing deeper each year. She lived long enough to see how thoroughly the film had become Rocky's story in the public imagination, but she also knew it had erased the darker corners that defined both him and her. In those final years, she began to speak with a different clarity. Interviews and conversations revealed what she had once guarded. She admitted the narrative that had spread through Hollywood and media was not the truth, at least not the whole of it. Rocky was not what the world thought. In some ways, he was even more remarkable, sharper, funnier, more alive than any screen adaptation could capture. In other ways, his life was filled with pain, cruelty, and contradictions the world preferred to ignore. Rusty's confessions carried an edge of guilt. She knew she had allowed the softer version to live on, perhaps because it was easier for others to embrace, perhaps because it was easier for her to bear. But as she reached the twilight of her life, she could no longer carry the silence. She prepared the world for a confession that would dismantle the myth so carefully built, a revelation that would not comfort but unsettle, a truth that would show Rocky not as the flawless boy who conquered fate, but as a human being scarred by suffering, surrounded by chaos, and denied the gentle ending the legend promised. The reveal. When Rusty finally broke the silence, her words fell like shards cutting through decades of sentiment. What she revealed was devastating, not because it diminished her son, but because it destroyed the illusion so many had clung to. Rocky was not perfect, she confessed, and neither was I. My baby was not in my arms when he died. The film had shown a tender passing, a mother holding her son as he slipped away, but in truth, Rusty was not there. Legal troubles had pulled her from home that day, and she was absent when Rocky drew his last breath. The call came from her partner, a phone call that shattered her and left her haunted, knowing that her son's final moments unfolded without her presence. Rocky was not buried in a cemetery adorned with flowers and baseball cards as depicted in the Hollywood ending. Instead, he was donated to UCLA's medical researchers, who carefully studied his skeletal remains. For scientists, his condition was not just a tragedy, but a unique opportunity to learn about craniodiaphyseal dysplasia, a disorder so rare that fewer than a dozen cases were ever documented worldwide. X-rays, cranial scans, and preserved bone samples from Rocky became reference material for years to come. His case was cited in medical journals and used in classrooms to train doctors in recognizing severe skeletal abnormalities. Students who never met him learned from the very disease that shaped his life. Rocky was not forgotten. When his story left the headlines, he became part of science itself. This chapter of his legacy is rarely spoken about, overshadowed by the Hollywood myth. Yet it reveals a different kind of immortality. In laboratories and lecture halls, Rocky's existence continued to inform medicine, ensuring that his short life contributed knowledge that outlasted him. But despite his future contribution to science, there was another side of his life and death that could not be ignored. Rocky was not the perfect miracle boy marketed to the world. As his mother said, he was not perfect. He was a real teenager, a young man full of contradictions. He was brilliant, sharp-witted, funny, and often joyful, but he was also flawed, burdened, and deeply human. His headaches tore at him, his vision dimmed, his body betrayed him, and yet he endured. Hollywood had trimmed away his contradictions, polishing him into a neat symbol of hope. But what Rusty confessed revealed a boy whose truth was messy and raw. Her final confession dismantled the myth with brutal honesty. Rocky was not the legend, not the cinematic miracle preserved in celluloid, not the flawless emblem carried by generations of admirers. He was something more complex and more fragile. A boy who lived and suffered. A boy who loved and was loved. A boy whose story was reshaped until the truth was unrecognizable. And as Rusty laid bare before her own death, what she revealed was not good. It was not soothing, not designed to inspire. It was the reality of a life that had been rewritten by others until the edges of his humanity were lost. It was the reminder that behind every legend lies a truth too complicated for the world to want, and yet too important to remain buried. The question now is, do we honor the myth that inspired millions, or the harsher truth his mother left behind? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us, and catch you in the next one.